Welcome to the What's Next podcast, sponsored by Locum Integration. This show is powered by Locum.
Have you ever noticed, like, we're always talking about innovation, right? Celebrating progress, putting these brilliant minds up on a pedestal.
Yeah.
But then, sometimes, it feels like that same brilliance, that standout intelligence, it kind of creates this, I don't know, pushback almost. Like some people actually resent it.
It's so true, and it's weird, right?
It is. It's a total paradox. And actually, the sources we dug into for this deep dive, they really go deep on this whole thing.
Yeah, they really unpack this core puzzle. Like, why do some of the most talented people hit so many roadblocks? While, let's be honest, average folks sometimes just sail through things, even in their careers, you know?
Right. It almost feels like mediocrity gets a free pass sometimes.
And that's the question for all of you listening right now. What does that say about the companies we work for, about our society as a whole? Is this preference for the average, for just playing it safe, actually hurting us in the long run?
It's a huge question.
Yeah.
And it's not like this is some brand new observation either. One of the sources we looked at actually quotes, get this, Arthur Schopenhauer. And he just comes right out and says, "There is nothing by which a man exasperates most people more than by displaying superior abilities." Like, damn, that's harsh. But
kind of spot on, right?
it is. It gets right to the heart of it. Why this friction, this gut reaction against, like, just being really smart?
What I found so fascinating is how our sources tackled this. They came at it from all these different angles, you know? We've got these timeless philosophical takes, then we've got psychology to break down the why behind how people actually act, and then, of course, the big one, what this actually means for businesses.
So, for this deep dive, our mission, right, to really get into the nitty-gritty, what's at the root of this resentment towards intelligence? And then, most importantly, how does that link up with this idea that a love of the average of just being comfortable can actually make companies weaker over time?
Yeah, let's dive in.
Ready when you are.
Okay, let's unpack this. This whole idea that intelligence, being smart, can actually push people away. It seems so counterintuitive, especially because we're always going on about how much we value progress, new ideas, and where does this come from? Smart people. But, like our sources point out, it's not always like that in reality.
You'd think it'd be a simple equation. Smart people, great ideas, everybody wins.
Yeah.
But our sources show us it's way more complicated.
Yeah.
You look back in history, there's this pattern, right? Take Socrates. All he did was question things, push boundaries, and what happened? Condemnation. It's like our source says, throughout history, these pioneers, these big thinkers, they often ended up isolated, misunderstood, even like straight up excluded.
It's wild. And Schopenhauer, he had this really sharp take on why it happens. He was like, look, this resentment, this negative feeling towards intelligence, it's not the same as being envious of wealth or status.
Okay.
Those things, you can, at least on the surface, be like, okay, I get why someone wants it. But intelligence, it hits a nerve.
Because you can't just buy it.
Exactly. It's not something you can just work for in the same way. And because of that, it can unintentionally show others what they maybe feel they lack. It's like, oh, crap, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought.
Like it's this mirror no one asked for.
Exactly. Uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. And that actually triggers this thing modern psychology calls cognitive self-threat. Just being around someone who's way smarter can make others feel, even subconsciously, kind of bad about their own abilities.
Yeah, it's a pretty primal reaction, not always logical.
And Schopenhauer actually, he came up with this term intellectual isolation to describe how those very traits that make someone brilliant can lead to them being, well, alone.
Yeah, and today that's evolved into this idea of intellectual alienation syndrome. It's that pattern of feeling disconnected socially that just seems to follow a lot of highly intelligent people around. The very thing that could benefit everyone ends up kind of backfiring on the individual.
So we're starting to understand this social pushback. But let's really get down to the nitty-gritty, the psychology of why this resentment happens. What are the root causes?
One key insight is that intelligence, just by its very nature, challenges something a lot of people believe in, that we're all basically equal when it comes to intelligence. So when you meet someone who is clearly more intelligent, it creates cognitive dissonance. Our deeply held belief clashes with the evidence right in front of us, and that creates mental discomfort.
Like a computer trying to process two things that contradict each other.
Exactly. A system error. And our minds, they hate that feeling. So what happens?
You've got to fix it somehow.
Our source calls it the intellectual defense cascade. Basically, our brains launch a series of reactions, all designed to protect our egos from this perceived threat. We need to feel good about ourselves again, right?
Right. And they break it down into three main ways this happens.
Yeah.
So let's take them one by one. The first one is active avoidance. What's that look like in the real world?
It's often an instinct, not a deliberate choice. People might just find themselves putting distance between themselves and someone they see as super smart. Have you ever felt that, like, a little hesitation to talk to someone you thought might be way over your head?
Oh, for sure.
Studies have shown that this can start really early. Highly intelligent kids sometimes get isolated in school, which is sad.
And it's not just face-to-face stuff either. Our source points out that this happens online too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You post something thoughtful, something complex, and crickets.
Like, people are subconsciously creating that safe space, even online.
They're like, nope, too much brain power, I'm out.
Right. Second way this shows up is through devaluation. So how does that one play out?
This is where people try to downplay the importance of intelligence. You hear stuff like, oh, they're book smart, but they have no common sense. Or you get this big emphasis on street smarts,
Yeah.
emotional intelligence, as if those are like the superior forms of intelligence.
Yeah, exactly. As if those are the real valuable skills.
It's like they're trying to level the playing field in their heads, right?
Yeah, it's a mental trick, making themselves feel better by saying intelligence isn't the be-all and end-all.
And this is a big one. The workplace actually feeds into this too, right?
Huge.
Our source talks about this crazy focus on culture fit when companies are hiring. And sometimes it feels like they care more about that than whether someone can actually do the job.
Yeah, we'll definitely circle back to that when we talk about the effects on companies. But, okay, third reaction in this cascade is hostile resentment. This one sounds a lot more, well, aggressive.
You can get pretty direct, right?
It can.
Yeah.
This is where the discomfort turns into actual hostility. Criticism, making fun of someone, trying to undermine their ideas. It can be subtle, like passive-aggressive stuff, or it can be super obvious, like straight-up confrontation and excluding someone from the group.
Ouch.
And researchers have actually found this thing called the intellectual aggression response.
That sounds intense.
It is. Basically, just being exposed to someone who seems really intelligent can trigger these immediate negative reactions in some people. It's like a defense mechanism.
And this is all made worse by what our source calls the intelligence visibility paradox, right?
Oh, absolutely. True intelligence, it's kind of hard to hide. It shows up in how you talk, how you think. So for a lot of smart people, these negative social consequences are almost impossible to avoid. The brighter they shine, the more pushback they might get. It's a bummer.
It really is. So now we're getting somewhere, right?
Yeah.
We kind of get why there's this pushback against intelligence, but here's the big question.
Yeah.
Why does intelligence get this kind of reaction so much more strongly than other kinds of excellence? Like, we admire wealth, beauty, social status, all that stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, most people would love to have those things. So what's the difference? What's special about intelligence in this whole social dynamic?
Our source points to this thing called the attainability factor. So think about it. Wealth, you can work for it, inherit it, whatever. Beauty, you can, work out, dress well, maybe even get some help from, modern science, social status network, work your way up. All of those things, even if they're hard, they offer a path.
Like, you can at least imagine getting there.
Exactly. And importantly, those things don't directly challenge your sense of self-worth in the same way as intelligence.
But intelligence, well, it can feel more like it's something you're born with to a greater extent.
Yeah. It often feels more fixed, more innate. It can be a marker of like, this is who I am and this is who you are. And that can make people feel like they're hitting a wall. Well, I can't change that about myself.
And that leads to this idea of fixed trait anxiety. It's like a specific type of social stress that pops up when we're faced with traits we believe we can't really change, no matter how much we try.
Makes sense. It feels out of your control.
It does. And it's a neat segue into this whole concept of embracing mediocrity. It almost sounds like a choice society's making, like on purpose. But is it really that deliberate?
I love this quote from our source, from Balthazar Gracian. To be well-liked, one must wear the skin of the simplest beast. And that really sums it up, right?
Wow.
It might not be a conscious evil choice in every single case, but it speaks to what makes us comfortable in groups. Mediocrity, our sources suggest, it thrives because it creates what they call cognitive safety zones.
You feel like you belong.
Exactly. When everyone's on a similar level, you've got this shared understanding, shared experiences. It reinforces the group, you know?
It doesn't challenge beliefs. It doesn't make anyone feel like they're not good enough.
Right. And it maintains this, what our source calls social homeostasis. It's like the psychological stability within the group. Everyone's safe, no one's rocking the boat, which minimizes friction.
And then someone super intelligent walks in.
And boom, disruption.
So like they create these ripples of cognitive dissonance, right?
Exactly. Suddenly, people are uncomfortably aware of their own limitations, maybe even different perspectives they hadn't considered before. Our source calls this competency anxiety, the feeling of, wait, am I not as good as I thought? And that leads to capability reflection stress. You're forced to confront your own abilities, and that can be uncomfortable.
It's not always a logical process. It's more like this deep social and psychological thing.
It really is. And so it makes sense that, as our source points out, we end up with this mediocrity reinforcement cycle.
Where average is not just okay, it's preferred.
Yeah, it's not only accepted, it's sometimes actually rewarded. It keeps the status quo nice and comfy. And you know, it's fascinating. Schopenhauer, he actually saw this happening beyond just intelligence. He said that really beautiful women often face a similar kind of social isolation, especially from other women.
Oh, wow.
So that observation has led to this idea of the excellence isolation effect, where any kind of exceptional ability, anything that makes you stand out too much, can lead to you being pushed away.
And our source makes a great point about how this can be even worse for women, right?
Absolutely. Highly intelligent women can get hit with this double alienation.
First, for being smart, which can go against some traditional ideas of what women should be like. And then on top of that, they get the regular pushback against intelligence that everyone else faces. It's like a double whammy.
It's really unfair. And in our digital world, all of these old social patterns, they've gotten a whole new layer of complexity.
That makes sense. Our source talks about these intellectual echo chambers online.
Yeah, the internet, in some ways, it's become this place where mediocrity can be amplified and celebrated.
And genuine intelligence can be pushed aside.
Exactly. Like, think about algorithms, right? Social media feeds us simple, easy to digest content, the kind that gets quick emotional reactions, likes, shares.
Because that's what keeps people scrolling.
Exactly. So complex, nuanced ideas, they kind of get lost in the noise. It's almost like a form of intellectual compression, squeezing complex thoughts down into sound bites.
Catchy headlines, quick takes.
Right. And social media rewards that, you know?
Yeah.
It prioritizes immediate engagement over deep thought.
It's all about those instant reactions, not thoughtful analysis. And then you get these online communities that can form so quickly, and they can mobilize against anyone or any idea that seems too smart, too challenging.
Mob mentality. And our source calls it a reactive reward cycle.
You get rewarded for being reactive, not thoughtful.
Yeah.
And this all contributes to what they call digital homogenization, where everyone's thinking starts to look the same.
Conformity wins, and then there's AI.
Right, which adds a whole other layer to this, doesn't it? The source mentions this artificial-natural intelligence tension, how it might be changing how we see human intelligence.
It's a fascinating question. As AI gets better and better at doing things that used to need human smarts, it makes us rethink what it means to be intelligent.
What does it mean to be human?
Exactly. And then there's this thing called complexity aversion syndrome.
Which is basically just being allergic to complex thinking, right?
Pretty much. It's this idea that nuanced thinking is just overthinking. And you see this online all the time. People get punished for being different, for having original ideas. Instead, conformity gets rewarded. It's like the opposite of what we need for real progress.
It's a little scary, honestly.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears now and talk about the impact all of this has on companies, on organizations, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters to you, our listener. How does this affect your work, your career?
Absolutely. And our source is pretty clear about this. They say that this embrace of mediocrity, this underlying fear of hiring truly brilliant people, it can be incredibly damaging to businesses. Let's start with innovation, that lifeblood of any company, right?
Yeah, if a company just wants everyone to be comfortable, to fit in, to not rock the boat, well, are they going to get any groundbreaking ideas?
Not likely. Our source talks about this fear of disruption that takes hold in those kinds of companies. They're risk averse. They just want to keep doing things the same way.
And then there's hiring, which we touched on before. If companies are obsessed with culture fit and they ignore actual skills, diverse perspectives,
Well, you end up with teams that are too similar, too homogenous. And you need cognitive diversity, different ways of thinking, to be truly creative and to solve problems effectively. Our source makes this point. Companies that ignore or even push away brilliant, outside-the-box thinkers are missing out big time.
They're missing out on the kind of innovations that could make them leaders in their industry.
Exactly. And then you've got this slower but equally damaging effect, the erosion of competence.
Where everyone's just kind of okay at their jobs.
Yeah, and it can be hard to spot at first. Our source calls it a downward spiral in hiring. Basically, managers who feel threatened by early competent people, they end up hiring less skilled folks. And that just creates a chain reaction.
So over time, the whole company gets a little bit dumber.
And then you get reduced productivity because no one's really pushing themselves to excel. Why bother?
If mediocrity's the norm, why rock the boat? And that obviously leads to lower quality products, services.
Which hurts the company's reputation, and ultimately, they lose customers.
And then it all cycles back to hiring. Prioritizing culture fit over actual skills, like shooting yourself in the foot, right?
It really is. While having a good work environment is important, it should never come at the cost of hiring talented people.
If you overemphasize culture fit, you end up with a bunch of people who all think the same way, look the same way, but maybe can't actually get the job done. And then the people who are really smart, really capable, well,
They either don't get hired in the first place, or if they do.
they get frustrated and leave.
Exactly. A company that embraces mediocrity is basically saying, we don't value excellence. And who wants to work in a place like that?
Especially if you're someone who actually cares about doing great work.
And then you get these managers who are so insecure that they'd rather promote less capable people just to protect their own egos.
So the competent people get passed over, and everyone sees what's happening. Resentment builds. It's a recipe for disaster.
It really is.
So what are the long-term effects of all of this? Because it doesn't sound good.
It's not. Our source lays out some pretty dire consequences. Loss of competitive edge, declining market share, damage to the company's reputation, and ultimately, stagnation.
They can't adapt, they can't keep up.
Exactly. It becomes this self-perpetuating cycle of decline. And this whole thing of hiring less intelligent people just to protect your own job, that's particularly bad.
It literally dumbs down the company, right?
Yeah, it does. Over time, specialized knowledge disappears, critical thinking goes out the window, new ideas are stifled,
And everyone is just doing things the way they've always been done.
which in a rapidly changing world is a death sentence for any company.
And then there's the effect on company culture, morale. If you're surrounded by incompetence, by people who don't care, well, that's going to wear you down, right?
Absolutely. It creates a toxic environment, breeds resentment, destroys trust between employees and management. It's bad news all around.
So the big takeaway here is that prioritizing comfort and stability in the short term can really backfire in the long run.
Big time. But you know, this tension between brilliance and being accepted, it's not a new thing.
No, history's full of examples, right?
Oh, tons. Think about Socrates, Galileo, Van Gogh. Our source calls it posthumous vindication syndrome.
It's like society can only appreciate these truly brilliant minds once they're gone, once they're not a threat anymore.
It's sad, really.
It is.
Yeah.
Like, they don't get the recognition they deserve until it's too late.
Mm.
There's this idea of not profiting their own land, this need for a temporal safety buffer before truly revolutionary ideas are accepted.
It's like society needs time to catch up, sometimes a whole generation or two. And in workplaces, you see this competency backlash, where people who are really good at what they do actually get penalized for it.
Which is crazy.
I know, right? Our source even talks about supervisory suppression syndrome, where managers actively try to hold back their more talented employees. It's like they're afraid of being outshined. And it's not always so overt either. There's this innovation gradient effect, where we're more comfortable with small changes than big disruptive ones. And then you've got the sociability preference hierarchy, which basically means,
Being likable trumps being smart.
yeah, sometimes it feels like that, which leads to this excellence penalty where being really good at something actually puts you at a disadvantage.
Well, if you're someone who's really smart, how do you navigate this whole mess?
Our source offers some great advice, starting with strategic self-presentation. It's not about hiding your intelligence, but about presenting it in a way that doesn't make others defensive.
Like, don't show off, be humble.
Yeah, there's this gradual revelation technique where you kind of show your skills over time rather than all at once.
Ease them into it.
Right. And then there's the collaborative intelligence approach, where you
Yeah.
frame your ideas as part of a team effort.
Not like, I'm a genius, look at me.
Exactly. More like, hey, let's figure this out together. And then there's capability diffusion strategy, spreading your skills across different areas, not just focusing on one thing.
So you don't become like the smart one and get pigeonholed.
Exactly. And then there's social buffering, basically building relationships that aren't just based on intellectual stuff.
Having friends who like you, for you, not just your brain.
Yeah, creating what our source calls intelligence neutral zones, spaces where you can just hang out and not have to be on all the time,
Yeah.
and building cognitive bridge relationships with people who can help you communicate with those who think differently.
Like translators between the different levels of intelligence.
Exactly, and building a support network, people who get you, who understand what it's like to be the smart one in the room.
Your own little tribe of fellow brainiacs.
Exactly. And finally, the source talks about finding appropriate outlets for your intelligence.
Finding your people.
Exactly. Seek out places where intelligence is valued, appreciated, where you can be yourself without being judged.
Like intelligence, positive environments.
Yeah, or even just having your own personal cognitive sanctuary space.
Your own little think tank.
Exactly. And building a network of intellectual allies, people who love to think deeply, just like you.
It's all about finding your tribe.
It is. And our source calls all of this social intelligence optimization. It's about being smart, about how you use your smarts.
Balancing brilliance with being a decent human being.
Exactly. But this whole thing, this societal tendency to push away intelligence, it has consequences that go way beyond just individuals, way beyond company profits.
And impacts everyone, right?
It really does. Our source talks about innovation suppression cycles, where potentially world-changing ideas get stuck because of social resistance. Think about all the solutions to problems, to global crises that might be out there, but we'll never see them because the people who came up with them were shut down.
It's heartbreaking, really. And then there's this progress paradox our source talks about. It's this crazy situation where we say we want progress, we want innovation, but then we turn around and push away the very people who can make it happen.
It's like shooting ourselves in the foot.
It is. So how do we fix this? How do we bridge this gap?
It's not easy, but our source suggests a few things. First, we need to develop what they call cognitive integration frameworks. Basically, ways to help people with different levels of intelligence communicate better.
Like building bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. We need to create innovation sanctuaries, safe spaces where people can be brilliant without fear of being attacked. And we need to develop cognitive diversity protocols, ways to incorporate different thinking styles into how we work and how we live.
So everyone feels valued. Everyone has a voice.
And finally, we need what they call social architecture innovation. This means designing new social structures, new ways of doing things that actually value intellectual diversity.
It's a big task, but it's essential.
It is. It really comes down to a choice, both for individuals and for society as a whole.
Do we stick with what's comfortable, with mediocrity? Or do we embrace intelligence, even if it makes us a little uncomfortable sometimes?
That's the question.
It really is.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to that central tension, this instinct we have to sometimes feel threatened by, even resent, the very intelligence that could help us solve some of our biggest problems. It makes you think, doesn't it, about all the amazing things that are probably out there, locked away in people's minds because they're afraid to share them. What if we could change that? What if we could create a world where everyone feels safe to be brilliant, where we celebrate different ways of thinking? That's the challenge, and it starts with each of us. What can you do, even in your own little corner of the world, to create that kind of environment? This deep dive wasn't just about understanding a complex issue. It was about sparking a change. So go out there and be the change you want to see.